That's it. We're happy to have you, Cassandra. Please come share with us.
So welcome, everyone. It's really great to see so many faces. Thank you so much to Rudy and really the whole Verde team. It takes actually a lot to put these presentations together. There's a lot of, organizing things from paninis to just all the little family things that come into actually building a community event like this. So thank you, Verde. And can everyone hear me throughout the back? We're good? Sweet. Okay, and Jamie, you're gonna be my clicker, por favor. So to gauge just who's here tonight, raise of hands, who's already growing in living soil or organic soil right now? Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Woohoo! And how many people have been cultivating in a warehouse indoors right now? Lots. Outdoors? Yes. And greenhouse. Cool. So I think one of the things about doing this living soil community presentation, and we're going to be doing these events once a month, is that a lot of different people are coming at this from different angles, right? Everybody has a different cultivation technique. And the thing is, there's a lot that unites us. There's more that unites us than divides us. I think all of us who are here tonight could agree that we're into clean meds, right? Responsible use of, any kind of pesticides if we have to use them. They should be organic, they should be safe, they should be applied at a responsible time. And so the thing about living soil is that we don't have too many brands. We don't have a lot of marketing already to, like the Canna brand. There are all these synthetic brands that have spokespeople. They have huge ads in magazines with hot chicks and all of that. We just have our community. So I hope tonight what I can share with you is my specific way of cultivation, but it's my intention to encourage all of you to develop your own. Because what works for me at the Verde warehouse now might be different than what works for me 5 years from now. And what works for you in your home grow is gonna be different than what works for me. So let's celebrate those differences, and I'll share with you what I can, and then at the end we're gonna do a Q&A. So let's go. Jamie, clicker. All right, so just so that you know who I am, I wanted to give a little bit of background. I learned to grow cannabis in Humboldt County in about the year 2000. So I've been doing this I'm 37, so I've been doing this pretty much half my life at this point. When I began growing cannabis, I was growing with synthetic nutrients, like a lot of people were. It was salt-based nutrients. I did cocoa, I did aeroponics, but it wasn't until I started growing cannabis organically that I really fell in love. Not just with the style of cultivation, but with the plant medicine that came from responsible cultivation. So the terpene profiles, like back then, we had no one to do tests. We could not test our weed. We couldn't even text anything about what we were doing. So it was all blind. It was all experiential. But even with that, I knew there was something different. When I came to Colorado in 2009, I basically took a hybrid model from Humboldt County outdoor growing, and I brought it indoors. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means, and give some recipes and special things later on in the presentation. But that's the foundation of why I grow the way I do, because I'm a Humboldt County outdoor grower, who came to Colorado, and I was like, never gonna grow indoors again. But here I am. So that my intention in being here is that I hope that all of you who would want it in the next 5 years are doing your own presentations. There's so much room, and don't for a minute think that you couldn't have everything you want in this industry. It's an amazing time to be here. So I hope to see more from you guys in the years to come. So here's a picture of what one of our rooms looks like after being freshly planted at Verde. You can see we've got 12-foot long living soil raised beds. So the same soil that we put into those beds almost 3 years ago is still there today. 2 years, 3 years? 3, yeah. So, so this is the idea. We don't do no-till, but we essentially are reconditioning the soil after every single harvest to mimic what it looked like when it came out of the bag 3 years ago. So that's the approach that we're using. What is living soil? Like, a lot of people have their own attachments to what that means. For me, I just want to know that it's biologically active soil that can be reused perpetually, and you feed it with raw plant, animal, and/or mineral nutrients. So nothing complicated, really simple inputs. And when you're watering, you're feeding your soil. You're feeding the microbes and the fungi within the soil, and that's your intention. But there are a lot of different ways you can go about it. So we hear a lot now about no-till farming, which is really cool. It's TLO, Korean natural farming, there are a couple others. I think it's really, really important to practice no-till cultivation in outdoor environments because we've seen massive erosion, right? So a lot of us aren't growing outdoors, but in conventional agriculture, we've seen so much erosion. Like literally, we are tilling and then washing the topsoil into our waterways, and we're destroying our productive agricultural lands in that way. So no-till is really, really great for that. One of the intentions is allowing for the long-term growth of microorganisms, especially the fungal hyphae. But there are also like bacterial masses that are holding that soil together and keeping it from being washed away. And so actually, in my humble outdoor, I would always do a no-till, but I had a fallow period. So I would plant a cover crop after I'd harvest, let it go the winter, and then it was ready to go in the spring. So when I started doing a more high-intensive indoor cultivation, I was like, I don't really know that that's what I want to do. It's not like I would have the ability to leave a flower room fallow for a couple months. And I felt at the time that that's how it worked best. So what I started doing was shifting the intention to rely more on rapid bacterial growth, sort of like a compost pile. So, think instead of like just a long-term outdoor field, essentially what we're doing in these beds is creating something that's almost like a compost pile that you turn at the end of every cycle. So at the end of every harvest, we'll test the soil. We do turn it. We, depending on our soil test, we amend essentially to recreate the environment of the original fresh bag of soil. So no fallow period is required, and in this way, we wind up getting almost 6 harvests a year out of every single room. And with organics, it's sometimes difficult for us to get into the mind frame of a CEO, right, who needs to see those numbers. But there are beautiful ways that we can figure out how to make our cultivation system more efficient, and that's a big thing that I want to share with all of you, because a lot of growers who are experienced, you grow amazing weed, but can you meet with Rudy? Can you meet with a business owner and convince them that you can also be really efficient and consistent? Because a lot is on the line. If our cultivation system fails, if we don't yield what we're supposed to, that's a lot of great people out of jobs, you know? So a lot in the legal cultivation model is relying on the grower to be very, very consistent, to be able to know exactly what the yields are gonna be within a range, and to never delay a harvest cycle. So we've been going for 3 years strong, and we've been harvesting once a week, every week, the whole time. So yeah, that's just, there are a lot of different systems, like under the recycled organic living soil tier and no-till tiers. They're all super valid. They're just pros and cons to each. I think it's really important not to use synthetic pesticides and fungicides. It's not safe for the people who are in the warehouse. It's not safe for the consumer. And I think in all living soil systems, that's kind of the rule. Not only are you creating a potentially unhealthy environment for the consumer and the warehouse folks, but you're also eventually destroying your soil food web too. So it's important to be mindful with all pesticides that you use, no matter which system you're using. I think also in all of the living soil systems, it's important to feed the soil and not just the plants. With that, make sure that your inputs are not harming your microbes. So that could mean a lot of things. If you're using salt-based nutrients, then eventually you're creating a very saline environment within your pot or your raised bed, and you're not gonna be able to reuse it. It's not that it's necessarily bad, it's that if you have a toxic salt buildup in the rhizosphere, you're not gonna be able to grow any plants. So think about soil fertility. And I think you can either read about what you're going to put into your soil food web, but it's also fairly intuitive also. So back when I started growing, there weren't books. There was like Jorge Cervantes. There was, there were a couple like old school books that you felt sketchy even buying. I didn't buy it with my debit card. It was like that. But you know that kelp is beneficial for plants. You know that that's a natural ingredient, and it's pretty easy and it's safe to use. So think about like, what are you buying? Is it something that you would find in nature? Because if it is, a lot of times that's just mimicking maybe a slightly more oceanic soil environment. I've been talking with some people in Hawaii who are having a really difficult time importing granular nutrients from elsewhere. And so we've been talking about like, well, you could chip and dry banana peels. And actually that's something that they're gonna give a shot for. There's potassium in there and it's great food for microbes. And so they're actually gonna wind up doing this sort of hybrid banana peel mulch. And I'm really excited to see what'll happen. Hopefully it's really tropical. So that's the thing, is that you can read a lot of books. It's absolutely important to do your research, but in natural farming, like what I love about it is a lot of it just makes sense. A lot of it's just common sense. So when you're thinking about adding something to your mix, just consider like, well, what's in it? Is it natural? And most of the time you can use it. So we're gonna get a little bit more into this, but another rule is you need to create a healthy environment, because you could have like the sweetest nutrients ever, but if you don't have the right kind of light, if your room feels stagnant and uncomfortable and hot, it doesn't matter like what you apply. It's if it doesn't feel healthy to you, in no way is it ever gonna feel healthy to your plants. So I can't stress this enough, because I've seen a lot of people get really into some advanced, like, geeky stuff, and it's great. But then they send me a picture of their plant, and they're like, Cassandra, it looks horrible. What do I do? What kind of nutrient deficiency is it? And I'm like, did you not water it last week? Seriously, this is actually like 9 times out of 10, and I get all kinds of questions from Instagram and social media and friends of friends, and half the time it was really that they let a watering go too far. And that's the problem. And they're chasing down nutrient deficiencies. Is it calcium? Is it like, and I'm like, it looks like you maybe didn't water. And so think about that. More important than any sort of advanced cultivation is just making sure the soil's not too wet or too dry. Just that it's a reasonable and healthy environment, just like we wouldn't feel healthy if we were in a gross environment or if we didn't get enough water. Another rule for living organic soil is to remove threats manually wherever possible, and this is how you keep it organic. If you don't prune, and if you're dealing with a pest infestation primarily just through sprays, it's not good. Because whatever you're using to kill pests is not something you want to use a lot of. Maybe it's not safe for you, maybe it's not safe for your plants or the microbes in the soil food web, but I am crazy, and anyone who works in the Verde garden will attest to this, I am insane about pruning. Pruning is like my jam. It is the foundation of how we get the yields that we get and how we're able to actually manage pests organically. Because if we find any sort of pest on the leaf, and they're gonna find it because y'all prune constantly, you find it, and then you can manually remove the bulk of the pests and then follow that up with a spray. If you're in veg, if you're in flower, you might just need to continue with the manual removal of pests and just ride it through. It depends on what your situation is, but when people say that things like neem oil don't work, it's usually because they didn't remove as many leaves as were necessary. Or imagine just a very choked plant structure where a spray wouldn't reach the inside. How are you gonna kill anything in there? So really opening things up, making sure you can see everything, great airflow, and then follow that up with a responsible spray. Okay, so here's my kumbaya thing. It is that everybody in this room is really different, right? So I see there's a certain like Colorado weed culture thing, but there are a lot of different people. You know, there are a lot of different people in this industry, and we come at it for different reasons. I know people who have come to cannabis for religious reasons. I know people who have had family members who need medicine. I know people who just like love to get high. There are so many different attributes, and being a team leader has shown me that you have to value everyone. And the thing that makes me super sad in this industry is there isn't as much unity as I would hope for, because people are different, and because people can get really into self-promotion and getting ahead. And I get it, right? Like a lot of people, you want to get ahead, you want to be successful, and you think the way to do that is to tear other people down. It is not the way. You know, I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing people in this industry, and some of my biggest lessons have been in seeing that I wasn't always right about somebody in the beginning. Or being a master grower, being open to different ideas from your team member. You know, Jamie right here, who is pretty much running the grow, he came to me and he was like, I really want to try this dragonfly earth medicine tea. And that wasn't part of what I did at the time. But I was like, okay, let's do some research, let's collaborate. Now it is like a solid part of what we do. And I learned a lot in the process. So, Jamie. But seriously, so as you work with other people in this industry, not only are you going to learn things yourself, but also if you want to hold a high-level job in this industry and keep it, you better really, really be able to work with other people and understand other people's points of view and understand that you're not always right about everything. So, I look and I see in our team, we've got scientists, we've got intuitives, we've got warriors, stabilizers, unifiers. They don't always have the best conversations at first, but if you can slow everybody down and collaborate, then you can come up with some really cool ideas together. So who in this room has heard of Abraham Maslow? Yes. Oh, okay. I thought it was going to be like no one. Jimmy, I knew you'd know. But so this was something that, so there's a guy, his name was Abraham Maslow, and he developed this model for humans, right? And the premise of this is that before we do anything in our lives, before we can, have self-esteem, love and belonging, all these things, there are foundational needs that must be met. So for humans, that is our physiological needs of air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, reproduction, safety. And if we have that, then we can move on and feel secure enough to look into our personal security, employment, resources, health, property, etc. But if we don't have those things, we might not be able to connect with people in friendship and in love, right? Because we're so focused on our primal needs that we're not really able to have a lot of space to think about friendship and love or self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, feeling good about yourself. It's hard, as we all know, when the rent's due and there's not enough money. It's really hard to be your best self if you don't have your needs met and you don't feel safe. I think it's the same with plants. So going back to foundational needs is, you can whisper sweet nothings and meditate in front of your plants and do all kinds of really cool stuff, but if they don't feel safe, they're not gonna grow well. So this is my kind of ghetto hierarchy of needs thing. So like us, plants need food, water, air, light spectrum and light cycle, and homeostasis. So again, before we do any of the wild, geeky, creative stuff, let's make sure that the plant feels physically safe and has all of its physiological needs met. The food doesn't actually have to be that complicated. If you look at cannabis in nature, it actually doesn't require as much as we give it. So think about just basic food. It doesn't have to be luxury food. Just make sure that there's enough. It's a broad spectrum nutrient, kind of like a multivitamin, right? Just making sure that there is enough. Then also, at that next step, and also you can use this when you're trying to assess what you need to do in your garden on any given day. Because if you walk in and stuff doesn't look right, a lot of people have a difficult time prioritizing, okay, well, what am I gonna do? So things don't look right in my garden. My plants are super sad. I will always look to the physiological needs first. Number one, I'll make sure that there's enough airflow. If there's any kind of mechanical issue going on that's keeping my plants from being in a correct environmental range, then that's what you need to fix 100% of the time, absolutely. If your plants are thirsty, you need to water them first. So there's that, but then let's say you spot a pest, you spot spider mites. Always those pests are your second priority after physiological needs. But it's really important to address those things to make sure that within a reasonable amount of time that you can essentially make your plant feel safe, because your plant doesn't feel safe when bugs are attacking it, right? It doesn't, again, matter any like cool thing you could water with, this miracle product that you paid like $700 a bottle for. None of that's gonna matter if you haven't taken the time to make sure that your plant is no longer being attacked by something, because they feel that and they know that. A step up from there is plants can also tell if you are angry. So there have been a number of studies done that show that plants actually scream and produce a stress response if a person is specifically like angry and potentially violent. I remember a long time ago, it was actually my first garden in Colorado. I was putting all the living soil into a bed, and my coworker decided that he was going to prune the plants and supercrop. He was kind of an angry dude, and I shouldn't have let him do this. But I'm like, I'm hauling soil, and he's in a mood, so he's not doing it. When I come out, he had not just supercropped, but snapped and bent plants. So we had about 350 plants. Every single one looked like a tornado had hit it. And those plants, all of them hermed. Maybe with an exception of like 5, but they had been stable until that. And I walked out and I almost cried, because I saw one moment luscious, healthy, safe plants, and then I saw all of our plants obviously feeling unsafe. And frankly, I didn't feel that safe with the dude either after he did that. But so think about that. You would, even if you're angry, yes, you still need to address food, water, air, and you need to protect against pests. But if you're in a really horrible space and you're not responsible with your energy, you might want to think about how much time you're spending in the garden. I think that's really important. I've been working with plants half my life, and I know that they're aware of me. So I know that there's some level of communication that's happening, and I want them to feel safe around me. They also can remember to some degree, and so every single interaction, I want to have a relationship like I'm building respect with one of you, and I'm building the respect of my plant. And that doesn't mean that I won't prune where needed and be tough where needed and have good boundaries, but at the same time, I think it's important never to forget that that's a micronutrient, right? Like the good feeling in the garden. And so protect that at whatever cost. The innovation and then the optimization, those are after you've fulfilled the first 3 important parts of this hierarchy. So here's where I just talk a little bit, just show you the pictures of what we do. So you can use pots, a lot of people do. You can, in a big warehouse environment, we use these giant, actually they're feed troughs. When I grow in small indoor environments, I like totes. I really like my plants to feel like they have enough root space. So for me, that goes along with making plants feel stable. When I have a huge tote or a huge bed, I know that it's not gonna dry out very quickly. So I'm gonna have time to test the soil and know, okay, this is gonna need to be watered today or not. Because I don't wanna ever hit that moment where I've forgotten about a plant and that dries out daily or twice daily. I've had that happen and it was really stressful. So I really love to do big soil environments just because it's so stable. And I'll plant a couple plants together in a tote, and we plant like pretty much 1 plant per foot in these big beds here. Another thing that I like about it is it allows plants to communicate with one another. I know that plants speak a lot with their roots, and I'm sure in other living soil events there are people that'll go into that in more depth, but to summarize, they do. They communicate through their roots so much, and so I like them being together. And I found that it not only creates healthy plants, but it also creates happy plants. So this is what we feed the soil with. So at the end of every single harvest, we're going to do a soil test, and our inputs are going to be different depending on what the soil test told us. And periodically, we'll send off soil samples to the CSU lab. I know the soil food web test is really great as well. I meant to bring my microbiometer kit, which measures the carbon microbial mass in your soil, which is also a really good test to do. And of course, pH and EC. But what we'll add is, we've got giant, usually 50-pound bags of kelp, alfalfa meal, worm castings, granular humic acids, sustainably sourced bat guano, biochar, which is amazing, dolomite lime, langbonite, and so this is what we use. Now, we have SOPs that we're not really allowed to alter because our ingredient label needs to be consistent. But I encourage you to start with, any number of things from that list, but then you can totally add amazing things like spent coffee grounds are great. I put the banana peels in there after I had the conversation with my Hawaii friends. So there are a lot of different things that you can add. This is adding nutrients, but it's also adding essentially things that will break down as in a compost pile, that we amend these evenly throughout the soil and then turn them just really allows for it to break down quickly. So we're not creating a soil that's too hot, but it's hit the ground running when we plant the plants in there. And so I know reading the TLO book, the Rev talks about how he only feeds tea. And I was like, well, he adds actually some bottled nutrients in there also. So I'm gonna call our stuff tea as well. We do use dilute amounts of bottled nutrients, like the Roots Organics Trinity, and all this is on our ingredient label. So, it's really just showing you how and when we use these things. So the Roots Organic Trinity is like a molasses-based ingredient that we use pretty much every time we water. We use it in veg, we use it all throughout flour, and in the molasses we feed in our probiotic tea when we brew it. We're also using the age-old Deficiencies seaweed, age-old grow, an organic CalMag, sometimes Roots Organic, phosphorus ingredients. And then we have this really cool probiotic tea that I was talking about, Jamie and I created together. This is based on the Dragonfly Earth Medicine tea, but a couple of the things on here like wild yam and burdock root and turkey rhubarb, they don't actually work as well, they don't break down as well in cold water. So we actually make a tea which makes all of these ingredients break down much more quickly, and then we add the microbes in once it's cooled. So we're actually making like a real tea like an herbal tea that smells up the office with all these cool ingredients. So we're getting lots of silica from a bunch of these ingredients. Horsetail's a huge one. Nettle has amazing vitamins. It stimulates the immune response in plants. Alfalfa we use both in powdered form in the beds, but we also use it in our tea. It has so many great vitamins, And it has the tricontinol, which is in all the really expensive organic bottled nutrients. But you can get it for really cheap if you just use alfalfa meal. So wild yam has the saponins, sugars, and potassium. Kelp is great for everything. Vitamins, growth hormones, burdock root, another great immune support. And turkey rhubarb is an important one because it strengthens the cell walls and helps your plants uptake more water, which is always a great thing. So you can play around with different herbs. I mean, even there are plenty of people who wind up using coffee spiked with molasses with great results. So you can find either herbs that grow near where you live. You can research the medicinal and nutritive properties of those. And if they list vitamins, if you can find that anywhere, then you know the vitamin that that plant would deliver to your plants. And this is how you can produce really great cannabis with very little money. And you can, just in the same way that like I use different herbal teas personally throughout the year and for different reasons, you can do the same thing and customize your own tea. It's cool to buy somebody else's product, but I think it's cooler to buy the herbs or wildcraft them yourself and put them together as you want. There's a lot of wiggle room. Like, people think that owners of nutrient companies necessarily know what they're talking about. I've met them. They don't necessarily. Some of them do. You know, there are some great professionals out there, but be careful, because don't assume that someone knows more than you just because they got some money and were able to package something in a bottle for you. You might actually come up with something better. And cheaper. So just a couple of slides that I am in love with. So when you're getting to know your soil, you know, some of us use ppm meters, some of us don't. And this is found actually in the Jorge Cervantes Cannabis Encyclopedia. There is an error where in the element, potassium and phosphorus are mixed up just in name, but not in property. So anyways, if you want to know how much of a nutrient your plant actually can absorb or would want, this is a great chart. It's very enlightening. You can see here that on the low end, plants would need 150 ppms of nitrogen, 100 ppms of phosphorus, and 50 ppms of potassium. But they can take up to, respectively, 1,000 ppms of nitrogen, 400 of phosphorus, and 100 of potassium. So that shows you that you do need to be a little careful about how much potassium you're actually feeding to your plants. This is just something good to be aware of. It's not like I wind up testing every single batch of nutrients for what ppms there are, but this allows me to freestyle and use products from this company, products from this company, and assemble them to my liking in a way that works without overdosing on one nutrient or leaving one nutrient lacking. I'd love to draw your attention to sulfur. So that's 1,000 ppms on the high end. It's almost up there with nitrogen as a required nutrient. So in soils with high organic matter, there usually is a lot of sulfur, but this is something that can really help a lot of growers just up their game a bit in adding sulfur, organic forms of sulfur to their grow. Because even in some countries like Australia, sulfur is actually considered a macronutrient and is listed with the NPK. So anyways, yeah, that's just a great resource to be aware of. This is another thing, even though I don't get too involved in pH all the time, it's really great to know that, and this is for soil. There's actually a different chart for hydroponics and salt-based nutrients, but there are absorbable ranges of certain nutrients. Now, in organic living soil, almost all of us are going to have an alkaline soil environment naturally. So it's fine, and I guess actually the numbers didn't quite make it onto the slide, but you're looking at between 6.5 and 7.5 is that comfort range right there. When I'm diagnosing nutrient deficiencies, when I know, okay, I have watered my plant, it really is a nutrient deficiency, this is something that I look to. So you can see that the more alkaline your soil becomes, the more likely it is that you might have an iron deficiency or a manganese deficiency. Whereas if your soil was slightly acidic, CalMag would be more common. It might be there in the soil, but it might just not be available. And you can see like weird, funny spikes, like with phosphorus right there. There's just, I think that's around 8.5. There's an area where it's just not absorbable at all. So that's another chart I really like, also found in that same encyclopedia. Okay, so good bugs and bad bugs. As cultivators, as especially organic living soil cultivators, the soil food web is really, really important to us. We know that there are pathogenic bugs or dangerous bugs. We know that there are beneficial bugs. So I've listed this on my order of what you would want to freak out about. Russert mites, root aphids, pathogenic nematodes, absolute worst. Russert mites, they're so microscopic and they move so quickly and reproduce so rapidly that they show up before you know they're there. So being really diligent and looking for them is important, and then taking strong action. Oftentimes this will involve removing plants from your garden. It's really, really difficult to deal with those in any kind of organic way. Root aphids are tough also because they're in our living soil. So there are certain drenches that you can do, organic drenches, but you're still gonna really, really upset the balance of your soil when you have them. Same with pathogenic nematodes. So those in red, those are situations where to keep a truly organic garden, you might need to get rid of your plants. Those are in red. I think spider mites aren't a super big deal. If you are on top of it, they're easy to spot. This is a situation where if you get spider mites or above ground aphids, don't rip your plants out. I've seen people decide because there's a spider mite or two, they're just gonna cut their garden down, but it's really not that difficult to deal with, just making sure that you're up with any number of sprays. If it's in veg, neem oil derived pesticides can work. Also essential oils can be effective. And even just if you have a small garden, even just spraying water can oftentimes reduce the pest population. Thrips, scale, fungus gnats don't necessarily prove so much of a threat. Those are all pests that you have time to deal with. So Springtails and worms are interesting because we love them on one hand. And I see them in social media where people are like extra stoked on their billion springtails. So it's hard to say because when springtails run out of food, they can eventually start attacking plants. I have seen it happen, especially if a plant is already unhealthy to any degree. A massive population of springtails can actually sometimes attack the plant. So you have to be mindful of that. All the same, they carry beneficial bacteria in their guts, and they're actually cultivated and used a lot for inoculants, just because they carry the beneficials in their gut. But that's something where I wouldn't have a contest to see who has the most springtails, because occasionally they can be a problem. Actually, the same with worms. A lot of people don't put worms in their houseplants because if worms run out of food, they will eat. They'll start with any remnant of dead root, and then they move into live roots occasionally. So I've actually seen a plant suddenly go limp, and I wondered what was going on, so I just dug the thing up, and I could actually see a cluster of worms on the inside of the root ball attacking both live and dead roots. So that only happens when there's a huge amount of earthworms in your garden. This is usually not a problem, but I just like people to be aware that I've had that experience, and it wasn't great. And then, of course, there are a multitude of beneficial predators that we love to see. But yeah, just know, be careful of some bugs. There are some bugs that aren't entirely great and not entirely bad. And so important, never panic. Never ever freak out. Even if your garden looks really bad one day, you can always make it worse. You could always make it worse. I have made it worse occasionally, usually when I'm completely freaked out and I imagine that I'm gonna lose all my plants and it's horrible and we all need to get really upset, which totally freaks the plants out in the process. You can overreact. If you make a call too quickly on what's wrong and what you think you should do about it, it could be the wrong thing. So I think it's a lot better to hold off and consider what's really the problem. Is it really a nutrient deficiency? Or do you just need to change, throw in an air conditioning unit into your grow? Like, think about those foundational, simple things first, the physiological needs of your plants. Make sure all of that's taken care of. Do some tests. Test the soil pH. Just be curious about it instead of freaked out, and then you can usually find the appropriate answer. So it's really hard to truly manage an organic cultivation facility. It's hard to do it at home, but it's really hard to do it in a warehouse where you have plants 100% of the time in 100% of the rooms. So I think it's good to use the same rule of thumb that one would use in a warehouse, just in your home grow, even if that's what you're doing. I think it's important to inspect plants every 3 days. That'll just tip you off to anything that's going on. And don't just glance, but really get in there and look, as if you were talking to a person. So the equivalent of looking in someone's eyes, do that with your plant. And slow yourself down for a moment. Think about what's going on. What is the posture of the plant, the color of the plant? Look closely. A lot of times if you just get a weird feeling, there might actually be something wrong. So trust your gut and that nonverbal communication that you can really cultivate with plants. I think it's so important to draw upon that. And it doesn't have to be like some woo-woo stuff. Like eventually you'll notice that something doesn't feel right. And you feel it in your gut first. And then sure enough, 5 minutes later, you're like, yep. We even had a guy, Bill was one of our great growers. He had a dream about, I don't remember, it was some issue, but he had a dream about it. Straight up came in, told us he had a dream. He's, what's that? He's our prophet. And, but that's the sort of thing you do. You start to dream about your plants. You start to know them. You start to know when things go downhill. So anyways, really get in there every 3 days. I would say prune first, spray later. And in that order too, like make sure that before any time that you're gonna spray, it's worth doing a solid prune out because your spray will go further. Take care of pests in veg because you have so much freedom with what you use in veg. I have no problems using pyganic in veg, even though it's a very harmful substance if you were to smoke it. It degrades in 1 to 2 days under UV light, But all the same, I don't think it doesn't belong on flowers. We don't need to do that. If we take care of all pest infestations in veg, and don't send your plants through if you shouldn't. If they're unhealthy, if they're infested with pests, if you know you're gonna be spraying all the way through flower, maybe you just shouldn't. Maybe you should just take that 2 weeks, just back off, delay, and in the end, you're gonna have a cleaner, safer product because you dealt with things before your flowers ever emerged. So there's a lot more freedom in veg. Be proactive, get positive IDs every time because you don't want to be spraying for something that's actually like a beneficial bug. Make sure that you're right. Get curious, use a microscope. Write everything down because we forget. We think back to that thing that happened a couple months ago, and we're trying to remember. Well, if we write everything down, like we have a harvest batch notebook, we write notes every single day, and if you don't, you get in trouble. Because it's important to have that information, and that's how we innovate. If you don't keep records, you're never gonna innovate. You're just gonna sort of have a feeling that maybe you changed this variable, oh, it's gotta be that. That's the thing that worked, when it was actually something else. And again, be responsible. No real pesticides on flowers, not even neem oil. Who wants to smoke neem oil, honestly? I mean, it smells like peanut butter and cigarettes. It could be, it's okay to put on your skin and on your hair and even to ingest, but I haven't been able to find any information on what happens if you smoke it. If you combust this oil, is that safe? I don't know, it could be, but because I don't know, I don't want to be responsible for applying a substance that I don't know what it does. I don't know if it's safe in that form. As an end note, I really like dilute essential oils for foliar sprays. If anything has to happen later on in flower, essential oils are essentially terpenes are the building blocks of essential oils, and they're applied in very, very dilute amounts so we can be more encouraged that they're safe, especially because a lot of the essential oils we use, like geranium essential oil, actually can contain the same terpenes that are found in cannabis, just in different ratios and amounts. So I've pretty much gone over all this stuff. We can keep going. But yeah, so know that fails happen, even to the best growers. It's just something that happens. When I would grow outdoors in Humboldt, I knew that I was probably gonna lose 15 pounds to mold every single year. Nothing I could really do about it. It went in the wood stove, we were done. But when you fail, take responsibility for it. I could have sold the botrytis infected weed, made some extra thousands of dollars, but that's not why we're here. So know that you failed, don't freak out about it, don't hate yourself or someone else for fails, they happen. But learn from your mistakes and move on. And then winning. It feels so good. So I love seeing everyone's pics on social media of their gardens, from the people who are on their first grow and their little tiny grow tent. The amount of pride that we can take in these beautiful plants is just so amazing. They have so much to teach, and I think it's really one of the most exciting things that we can do and grow. Photo credit there, I think, goes to Blair. Yeah. So yeah, that's, opening the door in the morning and smelling just the amazing aromatherapeutic effects of all those terpenes in each room is in itself a medicinal experience. So definitely celebrate when you do things right. And don't be toxic. No one will want you around. I put this in here just because, see it happen more than I wish it did in grows where people get super toxic with each other. Just remember that every time you're impacting your team in a negative way and making somebody feel terrible about themselves, you're making the plants feel terrible about themselves too, so you can just rest in that guilt. So yeah, the most important things that I've learned in a nutshell: if your plants look sad, don't assume it's a nutrient deficiency. That's like some amateur stuff that you don't need to do. Focus on your foundation first. Provide those adequate water, temps, humidity, airflow, light, space, and food for your beneficial microbes. Be proactive, but never freak out. A really important one here: don't obsess over products. Don't think that the cannabis industry products are any different than any other product that anyone wants to sell you. It is the same thing, often run by the same people. There are some dear friends of mine who make responsible nutrients in this industry and responsible products for us, but I go to the trade shows, I meet these people, and don't think for a second that the majority of them just have your best interest in heart. They are here to make money, whether their product works or it doesn't work. Some have amazing branding, branding campaigns, and I look at it and I'm like, that's amazing artwork, and it seems like they're successful. And then I look closer and oftentimes they aren't. So I want to dispel any illusion also about successful people in this industry. Social media makes it really easy for people to seem like they are what they aren't, or branding campaigns. So definitely go out there, read magazines, see what different product offerings there are in the market, but do the research for yourself, and again, use your gut. Because sometimes people, and I've done this too, there have been moments where I've been with other growers and they say something and they're so sure about it that I begin to doubt myself, and then I work with them and I watch them fail. And it has happened so many times that I've been intimidated by my peers in this industry just because they sound so convincing. So all of you, even, and I'm one of those people too. So I'm not asking you to take everything I say at face value or to make assumptions that everything that works for me is going to work for you. It won't. You need to make decisions for yourself. You need to learn how to be artist cultivators. So assess your abilities, but don't be too harsh and don't be too humble. Because sometimes, we all have room to grow, but oftentimes you know a lot more than you would feel like you might in a company of people who knows how to communicate in a more confident manner than you. So just remember that. The cannabis branding thing has gotten really intense, and there are some very impressive brands out there full of cannabis that's actually poison. So use your head and believe in yourself. So I hope you're mad successful. I do. I really look forward to seeing all of you who will be, and some of you who are industry leaders at this point. And I want you to know that I always try to answer questions that I get on Instagram specifically, but also LinkedIn is something that I use. So if you have questions, I'm always happy to answer them. Ultimately, I want us all to get there together. And so whatever dream you have, so long as you're responsible and passionate, I would love to help you get there. Thank you all. This has been a long presentation.